Well, welcome to Pico's World and AI Planet series. We're exploring a number of different topics this month, and one in particular that I want to delve into, with the new AI revolution, there's so many aspects, but I think to fully understand it, we need to get more into the background of how some of this media developed over time. And I have with me in the studio today Frank Uhle, who's the author of Cinema Ann Arbor, How Campus Rebels Forced a Singular Film Culture. It's a 2023 book that chronicles the history of film culture in Ann Arbor, Michigan, focusing on the role of the University of Michigan campus film societies. Frank's book details how these groups push the boundaries to really show independent and art films. And it says in the review that creating a vibrant and influential cinematic scene that inspired others across the country. It is a richly illustrated book, comprehensive history featuring interviews with filmmakers and archivists, and includes reproductions of vintage flyers and photos. So with that out of the way, I have read this book beginning to end. It's a great book, and I'd really highly recommend it to anybody. So Frank Uhle, welcome to our podcast. And for those of you who might want to explore the book, and you only have an audio podcast that you're listening to, his last name is spelled Uhle, Uhle. If I might start a little bit with you as an individual, Frank. Now, could you just say a bit about how you became interested in film and film projection, presentation, film history, cinema? You're coming to Ann Arbor. When was that? Could you tell us a little bit how you developed your interest in that?
Sure. So I began as a teenager watching movies on TV. I mean, as a kid, I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in the late 60s, watching movies at the local movie theater. I saw memorably things like 2001: A Space Odyssey. I saw some very cheesy flicks like Dick Van Dyke as Lieutenant Robin Crusoe and R.N., or I think it was called R.N. He was a sailor who was trapped on this uninhabited island. It was an uninhibited island too. And various adventures happened. But yeah, I saw those movies as a kid, and so I wasn't really a cinephile. In the early 70s, I started watching this late-night monster movie show called The Ghoul. And the guy named Ron Sweet, who sadly passed a few years ago, had this persona of the Ghoul who had kind of a fright wig and a lab coat with lots of buttons on it and some glasses, like sunglasses with one missing eye. And he was always kind of talking like a beatnik. And in fact, he had sort of taken his shtick from a guy named Ghoulardi who started this in the mid-60s in Cleveland. But anyhow, the Ghoul started broadcasting in the Detroit area in, I think, 1973 or 74. So as a teenager, I was about 14 at the time, we started watching The Ghoul every Saturday night at like 11:30, and it just blew our minds. So we were watching because of The Ghoul, the character, crazy anarchic guy who blew stuff up with firecrackers. But he was showing movies, so he would show the cheapest movies he could get, obviously. And some of my favorites in that early years of The Ghoul were some of the Roger Corman movies, like Creature from the Haunted Sea. In fact, I have a poster for another one, Not of This Earth, right behind me.
Oh, yeah.
But so that was my cinema background. So I came to college and actually started at Kalamazoo College in 1977. I took a film class, and it was taught by two guys that were kind of extroverted guys, and we saw, big classics. We saw Intolerance by D.W. Griffith. We saw, official classics, Blow Up. And, I sort of opened my eyes a little bit. But after a year, I transferred to University of Michigan. And when I got here, I just happened to have a high school friend who started the year earlier, who was a member of Cinema Guild, the Student Film Society on U of M campus. And he was telling me how this is classic, he got into all the movies for free. I was like, yeah.
There you go.
So that's for me. So I was like, okay, great. Well, I'll try to get into Cinema Guild. And I showed up at their, sort of orientation, mingling, new member meeting, And I was just instantly like intimidated. I mean, specifically, there were two older gentlemen, Ed Weber and Hugh Cohen, who had been in the group since the late 50s, who were kind of the major domo guys, and they were talking about Ingmar Bergman and people I had never seen a film by, and I was just like washed out really badly. And I still wanted to get into a film group because I really wanted to see free movies. So I tried to get in the Ann Arbor Film Cooperative, which had a very kind of interrogation kind of setup that you would walk into a room, you'd open the door, and there's a whole circle of people staring at you.
Oh,
and they're asking you questions, as a group. And I was just like, oh my God. Because the first one, you kind of walked around and talked to people in a room, and I completely just turned red as a beet, and I couldn't answer my questions. So I washed out of the Ann Arbor Film Co-op. So I washed out of the two most prominent groups. The Cinema Guild was showing classic movies. The Film Co-op was more like edgy fare. And I came upon a group called Cinema 2. By chance, I was going to see a movie called The Connection, which is a Shirley Clark filmization of an off-Broadway play about kind of jazz musicians that are waiting for their dope score. And I saw that movie, and there were people handing out little, applications. And I thought, well, I'll try these people, because I didn't know anything about them. And somehow they let me in. Their bar was lower. And so I got into Cinema 2, and I just started to become a film nut. I realized that, again, free movies, I could go to movies 7 days a week if I wanted to. The film societies were showing every night, and I quickly made several friends within Cinema 2, and within a few months I moved into a house that one of the Cinema 2 members had a vacancy in. So there were 4 guys living in this house, and I just was out going to see movies. I was in art school during the day, but I saw so many movies over the next several years, and this was before streaming and VHS tapes and video stores. So the only way to see these movies was to go in person. And
now what decade was this roughly? Now what years was this?
So I got into Cinema 2 in 1979 spring, and I was an undergrad until 83. So for the next 4 years, and 83 was just about when things like cable TV movie channels and VHS tapes started to hit. So for those 4 years, it was just intense. I was going to see everything from silent films. We'd sometimes go to live pianist, to the latest art films, to all the bogey classics and stuff.
Had Michigan Theater started showing like any classical things by then with the Ann Arbor major theaters, or was it mainly still just on campus?
It was mainly on campus, but the Michigan Theater did around 1980 become city-owned, or it was a nonprofit that was running it, but the building was transferred to the city, so they were starting to show some of the same classics. But to be honest, the people who were programming the movie, initially it was just kind of free-for-all, but several members of the Ann Arbor Film Co-op decided to start a sort of profit-making side operation that was programming the movies at the Michigan Theater. So they were kind of taking a lot of our bread and butter titles like The Wizard of Oz, Humphrey Bogart, Marx Brothers, and showing them at the Michigan, which had a big marquee they could put the titles on. So they were kind of drawing away material from our world, which we weren't very happy about. But
it reminds me that you during that time came out in your book as well. Your book, of course, goes way back to the 20s and 30s, all the way up to the present time. It's an amazing roundup of film generally as seen through the lens of a college town, but because the book was so good and dealt with so many aspects, it was really an eye into the history of film in the U.S. through the college campuses and how that film scene developed. But the Ann Arbor Film Festival seemed to be a seminal kind of event that was, again, kind of a nationally known place that showed films. And did you intersect with that in some way or view those films? Or?
Yeah, in fact, that was actually a key a factor in my transferring to Ann Arbor, because while I was in Kalamazoo College, my younger brother saw an article in the Detroit Free Press that said, "Oh, crazy movies, Ann Arbor Film Festival," and it was my spring break from college. He was still in high school, and we borrowed our parents' car to drive from Coldwater, small town right here, to Ann Arbor right here,
Okay.
and about 90 miles. And we got to Ann Arbor on a Saturday afternoon, and we just went to the film festival. And some of the films that we had read about in the Free Press, there was one that was a parody of Star Wars called Hardware Wars. We were just so excited, but it wasn't on the bill. But the other films we watched just kind of were a grab bag of experimental films. There was a short documentary, but it just kind of blew us away. And there were people. This was 1978. It was in what's now called Lorch Hall on campus. It used to be called the Architectural Auditorium, then the old Architectural Auditorium. But the people in there, they were like smoking cigarettes. It was like kind of a beatnik kind of scene, and it was cool. My brother and I were just like, man, we small town guys, we had never been in a place with such like hip people, and it just kind of knocked us out. And again, the movies, I can still remember sitting there watching this documentary about like earth moving, strip mining or something from 1978 and thinking, I've never seen a movie like this. It's just very non-commercial. It's just kind of a look at some part of the world I didn't know anything about. And I just loved it. And, when I had an opportunity to come to Ann Arbor, that vibe influenced me. But yeah, the film festival was so key. And the history of Ann Arbor is another component of the film societies, because they were bringing experimental films, cutting-edge films, and top experimental filmmakers around the country and even around the world would submit their films and, sometimes win prizes and come in person too. So, it became a nationally and internationally known phenomenon. It still exists, of course, today.
Yeah, it's really an important one of the film festivals in the U.S. I think it's notable, and it's really a long-standing tradition. Now, at some point, I kind of got the vibe from your book that you're really into being able to ferret through the archives and dig up all kinds of information. And at the same time, I found out that you'd been to the library school at the University of Michigan, and I wonder if did that impact your interest or style or desire, ability to take it from that angle in terms of exploring things, or how would you characterize that?
I mean, I certainly wanted to do a thorough and comprehensive job. So when I kind of mapped out what I was going to cover, I mean, at first I started the whole process. I'll give you a brief background.
Yeah.
The University of Michigan's bicentennial was in 2017. So in 2016, the department I work for at the university, which is sort of audiovisual production, technical support, I had done a lot of freelance writing already. So they said, well, maybe you could write a little history of our department. So I went out to the Bentley Historical Library and started pulling up whatever I could find related to campus, technical support and things. And I wasn't finding that much, but I started finding folders about film on campus, film societies that went back to the early 30s that I knew nothing about and no one had ever told me about. So initially my thought was, well, geez, I'll write a second article about the campus film societies, which of course I had been a part of, and you were too, and which were kind of forgotten. I mean, they had kind of dissolved in the early 2000s, last gasp. They were nobody. If you went on campus and told people, oh, there used to be movies in like 7 different campus auditoriums, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and people would be lining up out the doors routinely, and there'd be like Frank Capra would come, Jean-Luc Godard would come, Robert Altman would come. People would, no, that isn't true. They couldn't even imagine what it was like. And so I really felt that was my initial goal, was to just cover the student film societies. But as I, kind of mapped out my thing, I started interviewing some people, like my good friend, Professor Hugh Cohen, and they were telling me things that I sort of knew, and I thought, well, this will be kind of a breezy thing. It'll be 5,000 words. I'll put it in the the bicentennial website, because I talked to someone who said, sure, you can do that. But there just were so many little sidelights that I thought, I can't do the story unless I cover them. And one of them, as you just mentioned, was the Ann Arbor Film Festival. I was like, gosh, I can't talk about the film societies and not have a whole separate coverage of that. And then there was an 8mm film festival. I said, oh, they got to cover that. And then there were people making films in town, and I said, oh, I got to cover that, because they were members of the film societies. And then the projection unit, which I worked for, was like, well, I got to cover that too. So the book, it turned into this thing. And then for each of those subjects, I started digging. And, once I would get one of them built up, I'd look at the one I'd just done before that, and I'd say, yikes, this looks pretty thin, and I'd go back to that one, and I'd build it up. And then I'd go ahead 2 more, and I'd find something, and I'd build that up. And, it was just this sort of like, I'd build up 3 stories here, and I'd build up 4 stories here, and then I'd build up 5 stories back here. And, it took me 6 years ultimately, way past the bicentennial.
Well, the book, the result, ended up being fantastic compendium of so many aspects, and I think it won the Michigan Notable Books Prize and was shortlisted for the Alice Award. And those are all very important, and it's a beautifully illustrated book as well. But we'll get back to that a little bit more later.
Sure.
Now, coming at it from a slightly different angle, I think one thing I've always been kind of I think the average person is kind of curious about. So many people from the time they were children to anybody that's ever been to a cinema, a theater, it's becoming less common for people to watch things on their computer screens and whatnot now. But almost everybody has gone to the theater to see something because it's just better on the big screen. And now you pursued a career in projecting films and so on. And I think, from my point of view, like a lot of people, they're really fascinated by things they can't see, and like every once in a while you see like a documentary on TV where they found some secret tunnels under New York City and they were used for such and such, and no one's ever been down there. So they have a big special, we're going to unlock the door and show you what it's really like suddenly. And I think a lot of people see the projection booth that way. It's kind of a mysterious, the light comes out of it, but they don't know what's behind it really. And what I was going to ask you, if you might walk us through a little bit of the evolution of the technology of projecting films. Maybe you could go back from before your time, but up through your time, some of the changes you've seen, maybe both in the film medium itself and also the projection technology, and give us a sense of what it's like to be in that booth and doing that important job.
Sure. So briefly, projection was kind of first invented in the late 1800s. So I think circa 1896, Edison patented something which probably he didn't really invent, but an actual projection onto a screen, and people were taking these short films that were being made at the time around, and it would kind of like a road show. They'd show up in a small town, they'd charge a little money, and people could go outdoors at night and watch some film projected on a screen, and of course they were silent. And that evolved into like what were called Nickelodeon theaters in the early 1900s, which were showing a bunch of short subjects. They might have a player piano or a live piano player. And then in the late 1900s, early teens, they started having longer films that were feature length, and so they started using bigger spaces to show the films, and building movie theaters, of course. And then by the 20s, they were building these so-called movie palaces. And the equipment, the technology hadn't really changed that much between Edison and the 20s. They were getting bigger, but it was basically, the film sizes changed a little bit, and then they kind of got standardized at 35 millimeters wide, which has 4 sprocket holes for each picture, and the machine shoots it through. There's a roll of film, and it goes through, and there's this little mechanism that shines the light. The film comes through, it stops, just brief 24th of a second. Light pops through it, a little shutter closes, it while the shutter closes, it pulls it down. Shutter opens, the next still image is there. Shutter closes, pulls it down. Next still image is there 24 times a second, and of course that creates the illusion of movement. But up until the sound era, there wasn't like a standard speed, for example. They would crank it by hand, and it looked too fast because there was comedy, or it was this normal speed. And I think they would actually when they shipped the film, they'd say, we'll show this film at an average of 22 frames per second. But when they created sound in the late 20s, they obviously had to say every film has to go at 24 frames per second. They picked that speed, and then the film would always look the right speed, and the sound would be accurate. So
if we could digress just for a second, though, and come back to that point, I think many kids today, even young people today, they've never even seen a piece of film before.
Right.
They really know what it is, and so it's kind of a transparent plastic-like medium or vinyl-type medium with pictures on it. And so behind that, from the beginning, Edison's time, was it basically like a light bulb that was shining through that in order to project the image onto the wall? Or
yeah, in the earlier days, they had what was called carbon arc light, which I've actually run, which is a super high voltage, goes through a piece of carbon, and then another piece of carbon touches it, and an arc of electricity goes between those two, and then you pull them apart, and there's an inch long thing about as bright as lightning or the sun, and that has a big mirror behind it that's focused to shine that brief little snippet of super bright light through this film and onto the screen. So carbon arc was the way they could project things onto a big screen. In a smaller space, they could probably use a light bulb, but and they do, if you have a portable 16 millimeter projector, just a light bulb in there. But anyway, carbon arc is very bright and hot, and the film in the earlier days, until about 1950, was the only way they could get a clear strip was something called nitrate, or cellulose nitrate, I forget the full exact name, which is highly flammable. It's composed with the same ingredients as gunpowder, right?
That's the film itself. The film is made of that.
Yeah. So like the negative of all these classic films, Casablanca is basically like a bomb that could go off if someone dropped a match on it.
God. Yeah.
Go like that.
Jeez.
I burn nitrate film. It burns unbelievably. So anyhow, but yeah, so the technology was just, there's a motor. It's pulling these things through 24 pictures a second. Goes through. There's about a 20-minute reel, which is maybe 12 inches wide. On the top, it goes through. There's a take up. It takes it up on the bottom. A light shines through a little sliver of wiggly lines, which is the soundtrack, and that is picked up by a photocell, which converts the wiggliness into sound, obviously, and through amplifiers out into to the theater. So in the projection booth, there's two machines side by side, and you have a 20-minute reel here, a 20-minute reel here. So you run the first reel through, and when it gets right near the end, a little black dot will appear on the screen, and you start the second machine. And about 7 seconds later, a second black dot will appear on the screen, and you hit a button that shuts the image off on the first machine and opens the image on the second machine and makes a sound switch. And if it's done correctly, no one even notices that happens.
You have to be really on your toes to see that cue to change over to the next film reel or whatever, so people don't notice.
So as soon as that reel's on, then you're taking the first reel off, you're threading it, the new reel, the third reel, you're rewinding it. If it's a carbon arc, you're changing the carbons because these carbons burn up. They're flaming. Or now in the 60s they developed the xenon lamp, which replaced carbon arcs because it lasts thousands of hours. But it's very noisy in the projection booth. Oh, go ahead.
To give people a kind of a concept of the scope of the auditoriums we're talking about, like you mentioned the carbon arc, which is extremely bright light that's needed to project the image of the film further, like in a bigger auditorium. So in a kind of a classic big theater, like say the Michigan Theater in Ann Arbor,
Hmm.
and other auditoriums on campus. What are the kind of the comparison seatings or sizes of these auditoriums, and how big would the campus theater auditorium have to be to require one of these kind of brighter lights?
Yeah, I mean, if anything over probably even 100 seats is going to require a pretty bright light. I mean, there's theaters that are 4,000 or 5,000 seats, like the Fox Theater in Detroit, massive theaters, and they're huge carbon arc bulbs or lighting systems or xenon lamps to make those things fill up a giant screen with bright enough image that people all around this room are seeing a pretty bright image. It takes an awful lot of light power to make it work in a big space. But even in a space 400 or 500 seats, it is professional grade equipment is required. It is not something that your home bulb of your projector will make a bright image for.
And the larger auditoriums using these larger light power sources, are those used in the drive-in theaters too that people used to go to with cars, and
Mm-hmm.
the projection booth was quite a ways away and shining through the air, and the snowstorm or whatever was coming through?
Yeah, no, I worked at a drive-in for 2 summers, in fact, in Ann Arbor, and that's where I used carbon arc lamps. We had massive carbon arcs, and the screen was, I don't know, like 3 stories tall and about 60 feet wide. I mean, it was massive, huge.
Wow.
And we would try to start the movie at like 10 o'clock at night, and it wasn't quite dark out, so the picture would be kind of hard to see. I mean, it was not bright enough. You really had to pump a lot of light through. And in like the classic days of the drive-in, they would actually make special film prints for the drive-in that were lighter, that were not as going to look dark, because they printed them a little bit lighter.
Interesting. And since it was outside, what happens if it was raining or something? Would that really significantly blur the movie, the projection, like trying to go through the rain? Or
Not too bad. I mean, we had kind of a little hole in the booth front wall that had like a little, I don't know, covering over it. So I don't think we actually shined it through a window. We just shone it through. I mean, if it was raining, obviously it would go through the rain. But I don't think that made as big of an impact. I mean, the screen itself would get hit by water and have kind of a weird kind of mottled look.
Interesting,
But
interesting.
yeah, I mean, the drive-in, you showed the movie come rain or come shine, and if people actually, not to be critical here, but if people were dumb enough to go out to watch a movie in a drive-in in the rain, first of all, they probably weren't watching the movie, and second of all, we're not going to give them their money back, because it's like, you should have looked at the weather, man,
Yeah.
So yeah, the drive-in was, on the edge of sanity a lot of the time.
I remember going with my parents as a kid, and it'd be the winter time and really cold, but you had to turn off your engine because you couldn't have cars running all over the
Right.
place. And so the speaker would actually have a built-in heater that would heat your car at the same
Yep.
time that you could hear the speaker. You wind it up into your window and it'd be sticking inside your car. But you said that you kind of made the point, these different sizes of film, like the bigger ones, like 35 millimeter, they have more information or whatever on them, so you can put it on a bigger screen with higher
Right.
definition, where 16 millimeters may be better for smaller places. And I wonder, and there's an even bigger format, isn't they use these days for the IMAX or whatever. What is that?
Yeah, there's, 70 millimeter, which was introduced, it actually was originally introduced decades and decades ago for a few trial kind of things, but in the 650s, I think, they started trying to entice people away from television, so they would have widescreen films and 70 millimeter, which was 35 millimeter, twice as wide, so it is higher resolution, like 4 times as much image information is on each photograph that makes up the 24 frames per second. So you could show that on a huge screen. I've shown 70 millimeter I showed it decades ago at the Michigan Theater. We would show like 2001 or Sound and Music or Lawrence of Arabia. And then more recently, I've shown some of the short runs that they do, like Oppenheimer and Dunkirk. I showed in a theater in Livonia. So there's still, it's kind of a vanity thing for, I think, the film director who wants to say, oh, I shot it on film. So they actually cut a negative, make prints, and then they send them out to theaters for like a few weeks of 70 millimeter presentations.
I think for home movies, that 8 millimeter was the rage for a while, and if your wall is only 6 feet away from you, wherever you're showing it to the family, but then 16 millimeters bigger, and then 35 millimeters bigger. But what if you only have a 35 millimeter print, but you have a pretty small place? Is there such a thing as a portable 35 millimeter projector that you can put in a small room? Or
I mean, I'm sure someone had made such a thing, but it's very impractical. I mean, I'm aware of, certain in the Detroit area. I've heard of several people who were kind of wealthy, like auto executives or something, who had some connections, and they built like a home theater in their basement with 35 millimeter. In fact, one guy had 70 millimeter in his basement.
Wow.
And they would have some connection in the industry, so they would get film prints. And, the neighborhood kids could come over and watch, Tarzan or some King Kong movie, in their basement, and mom would make some popcorn. It would be have like a little theater built in. And, those were kind of super rich guy kind of perk kind of situations. But, 16 millimeter, most people had 8, or it was regular 8, and then they invented Super 8 in the mid-'60s. So there's a wonderful book by a guy who also came through Ann Arbor named Danny Plotnick. That's the history of Super 8, which is well worth picking up. It's another big kind of picture book format. But, yeah, 16 millimeter, very few people even had 16 millimeter at home. It was much cheaper to do 8, and 16 really got taken over in the war years. World War II, it was used for training films, and then after the war, it became used a lot by experimental filmmakers. So people were able to get these small portable 16 millimeter cameras that had a kind of a wind-up thing, and they get a Bolex, and they'd shoot something weird and experimental, and they could do double exposures with it. And a lot of people, Stan Brakhage and those kind of people came through with 16. So that's when the Ann Arbor Film Festival started. It was all 16 millimeter.
Oh, okay.
Not all, but mostly for decades until about 2003. And they finally had to open it up to video because that was becoming the preferred format then.
Yeah, I was very excited and appreciative when you gave me a tour of some of the projection booths around campus, and brought back some memories, but also I learned some new things that had developed after my time of being there. But one thing I think I may have witnessed the arc lamp thing in action at one point, and I don't remember for sure, but because there's flame kind of involved or electricity involved and heat, isn't there some kind of ventilation system too that's required for that, or not?
No, absolutely. I mean, at the drive-in, there was a ventilation system. I mean, every film booth, even the ones that don't have carbon arcs, have like an exhaust pipe that goes up into the ceiling, and then there's a fan up there that sucks the air through as the bulb gets super hot, or the carbon arc, to pull that through. And the carbon arc specifically is burning, so the exhaust of that has got to be exhausted out too. But in the carbon arc booth, and also when I was running Oppenheimer, the projectors actually were water cooled, because the projector itself gets so hot from the light shooting through that there would be like a kind of water little pipe going around the gate of the projector, and you'd have to turn on a faucet that would shoot tap water through it continuously while you're showing the film, and it would be into the sewer system.
It's amazing because nobody really, they go into the theater, they don't know anything about what's going on in that booth and all this technology and how it's changed over time, and just water cooling system. It sounds like a V8 engine from the 1970s or something. It'd be water cooled with a radiator or something. It's just kind of an amazing interesting concept. I think some of our viewers, because of the title of the series and that, they're thinking about the impact of media, film, and other things being impacted by AI. That's a more recent thing, but the really purpose of this is leading up to that, not really getting into the AI stuff so much, but so people understand better what the AI leapt out of to go beyond that. So I wonder if you could now elucidate a little bit the jump from the solid media rolls of film, like we've been talking about, the 8mm, 16, 35 and 70 and so on, over to the digital. And when did that start to happen, and how, and where is it now in terms of projection on campus or commercially? What is that all about?
Yeah, so people, once television standards were established in the late 40s, or actually earlier, we could have had television before World War II. It was demonstrated. I mean, the Germans, the Nazis, had television in the mid-30s, and the World War II, or the 1939 United States World Fair in New York had television demonstrations. But, in the late 40s, it became a thing, and people started buying TVs. So by the late 50s, everyone mostly had a TV set, and the resolution wasn't great. The image quality wasn't great. So to actually create a film based on a digital image, it was pretty dicey. I mean, at first there wasn't a tape recording system for television video signals, so the way they would record it was what's called a kinescope. They would shoot a 16mm film of the monitor, a special monitor, and then that would become a record of a television program. And I collect films. I've got a bunch of kinescopes. They don't look too horrible, actually, but by the late 50s, they had developed videotape, but still the resolution was kind of set. It was what's called NTSC today, which is 640 by 480 lines, if you can imagine. That's pretty low resolution. And there were a few people that tried to make high-res things. And famously, there's this movie you can get a Blu-ray of now called The Tammy Show, Tami.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a rock and roll concert film in 1964.
I think we showed that, yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, it was filmed in electronovision, which was supposed to be high definition, but I actually read about it. It was kind of a fake. It wasn't really high definition. It was slightly higher than average, but it was far away from what we call high definition today. But by the early 2000s, there were higher definition video formats available, and so
video was a form of early digital then, in some way.
Well,
compared to film.
I mean, it was analog. It was recorded on an analog tape up until a certain point when they could make a digital copy instead of an analog tape copy. But the signal coming in was an analog kind of thing. But again, and I'm no expert on this, but the digital higher definition, people were always trying to make it so the picture would look better. And then by the early 2000s, I think it was viable. And so TVs started, be able to buy a HD TV, which was shaped, instead of the kind of square shape of an old-fashioned TV, it was sort of a widescreen thing. And the movie industry quickly realized that they could make it would be a lot cheaper for them to produce films and to distribute them, because they weren't making, a film print that was like 100 pounds in two big heavy cans of 35mm film that would have to get shipped, by a truck or bus. They could put it all on a hard drive, or today they even send it by satellite to theaters. So that was going to save the industry a lot of money. Although, interestingly, movie budgets keep going up, so the special effects, the CGI, makes it 10 times more expensive. But but yeah, so the movie industry also, there had been the whole Napster thing where audio was getting bootlegged and sharing of files. So the movie industry created a set of standards for what became known as a DCP, a digital cinema package, I believe is what it means, of a hard drive that would come to your movie theater, and you could plug it in, and it would copy it onto your computer that's built into your projector, but you could only play it if another file was inserted that had a key that would unlock that master file, which might be like a 100 gigabyte file, and then you could project the movie. And so it's unlike home video, you have to, it only plays on the industry specified machines, etc. So that's digital cinema, and that's the current state of the art in movie theaters. And of course, at first it was what's called 2K resolution, which is about the size of your home computer monitor, amount of pixels. And of course, they've been bumping it up to 4K and even 8K to make it look super sharp. But 2K doesn't look still looks pretty good blown up on a big screen, and it's effectively the same as what a Blu-ray looks like in resolution. But that has completely taken over. I mean, there's still people who shoot on film because they like the look of it, but they still convert it digitally into a digital image for projection, except for the rare instances like Oppenheimer, which go out in film.
So I think you gave me a bit of a tour of this. I wasn't always understanding what I was seeing, but you mentioned 2K or 4K something being the new standard for digital, and I wonder if how the projection differs from, say, projecting a 35 film. Is there still some kind of bulb required, or is it just a big television screen at the end of the theater that illuminates it? What's the actual mechanics of it? How is it different when you receive from the film distributor a copy of the digital film, in terms of the size and the weight and how you project it? How is that different?
Well, the digital film comes on a hard drive, or now again, sometimes they just send you a file that you download directly over the internet to your server.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And things like trailers and ads come that way often as well. But you have a projector that's not, I mean, it's very different from a movie projector because there's no mechanical, reels and rolling, sprocket holes and things. But there's a big giant xenon bulb, which is the xenon bulb is the modern equivalent of a carbon arc in that it's super bright. So the same type of bulb that would have been in a 35 millimeter xenon projector is effectively in the digital projector. So that's about the same. But then the rest of it is, there's different ways that they create the image, and there's the newest best ones, I guess, are laser. So there isn't even, I guess maybe those ones don't have a xenon bulb, but those ones have a better dynamic range because the blacks are pure black as opposed to something that's projecting light. If it's projecting black, there's still a faint gray, but the laser is not projecting anything on that space. So that is the future, the state of the art, I think, is the laser projector. But again, it's very much like it's a computer. You have a digital file, and you create a playlist, like you might do in iTunes or Spotify or something. You say, I'm going to play a trailer, I'm going to play a couple advertisements, I'm going to play, coming soon, little snippet. I'm going to play an announcement to put your cell phone away. I'm going to play something that says feature presentation. Then you're going to put the file for the movie, and then you're going to put another file that says thank you for coming, and then you can insert cues in that. So you can say, turn the lights down halfway here. Okay, the feature starts turning the lights all the way down. Or turn the sound up a little bit for the feature. At the very end, bring the lights up part way when the credits come on, and then if there's like a curtain in your theater, close the curtain, and it'll automate that curtain closing. So the projectionist, in fact, is only going to be needed really the first day to set up all those cues, to test the volume levels, to test where the credits start, to put that cue in for the lights for the credits. And then once that stuff's kind of written in stone on the playlist, the people in the front of the theater can start the movie. You don't have a projectionist in the booth. For the most part, most theaters, or in a lot of cases, they just create a timer. So it just says, start the file at 4 o'clock, and no one even has to push a button. At 4 o'clock, the movie just starts.
So they push the button and nothing happens. They panic and try to find the projectionist where he's hanging out.
Right. So then there's a person on call who gets a beep on their phone, and they're like, "Oh, theater number 4, the bulb didn't come on." And I was doing that. I was the head projectionist at the Michigan Theater a few years ago, and that would be, eating my supper Friday night, and it's my night off, and oops, the thing went out, so you got to race in. But
now, didn't you mention that you had got the assignment at one of the larger outlying theaters when the Taylor Swift movie came through or something, that they didn't have they couldn't find many qualified projectionists anymore to run some of these things, and they had to find who they could find. And did I get that right, or is that...
Well, what it was the 70 millimeter.
Okay,
so
70.
When they do these, like every year or so, they do these. I mean, again, I call it like a vanity thing. Like Christopher Nolan makes Oppenheimer, and he wants, because he's the big director, he wants to shoot it on film, and he's going to have a special, like 100 film copies made of the film, and theaters in 100 different cities are going to show it as a motion picture with, I mean, literally they're using 60, 70-year-old projectors that have been rebuilt because they don't make them anymore.
Wow,
with 70 millimeter. So like one auditorium in a metro area will have it in 70 millimeter, and then a dozen auditoriums will show it on digital. So, it might be released at 2,000 theaters as a digital presentation, but then 100 around the country will have it as a film presentation. And it's just kind of a perk. It's a marketing ploy. It's, there are certain people that want to see it on film and will go drive an hour to see it just in that one theater that's showing it on film, and create some buzz. And it's a marketing thing. And
is it a noticeable difference? Like you've seen a lot of on both formats, digital and regular film as well, but if they're doing it in 70 millimeter, is that something you should really drive a few more miles to see, or can the average person really tell the difference, or is digital better? Or
yeah, I don't think the average person would tell the difference. I mean, the sound is effectively the same. The 70 millimeter film has a digital soundtrack, which isn't even on the film. It's on a separate file. So the sound is the same. And, there's certainly a quality to the analog image that is not, you can't capture digitally. But digital projection has gotten pretty good. It's been, I think, about 15 years since it was officially rolled out as like the industry standard. And during that time period, they've upgraded several times. So one thing that's interesting is 35 millimeter film projectors from the 30s are still in use in a few small little towns around the country. And you can rebuild, you can put in some new gears and stuff. That's 80, 90-year-old piece of equipment will still work. But with digital projection, the earliest models have all been junked because they've been superseded by higher resolution, brighter images, sharper images, and even now, people that bought like a 2K projector, they want to buy a 4K projector, and people that bought a 4K projector want to buy a laser projector. So it's interesting how in only a little over 15 years since the industry adopted digital projection, the theater owners have had to buy like 2 different sets of equipment, whereas in the past, that same projector, I mean, I was working at the drive-in in the late 80s, and that projector had been in there for 30 years and since the 50s, And
now, I think from an old consumer point of view, like I remember Bell and Howell and maybe a couple of brands that may or may not have been the most widespread, just the ones I happen to hear about. But when you got towards the apex of the arc bulb and the xenon bulb projectors and that, were there certain companies that were famous for making those, and did they cross over into making digital equipment, or is there a different set of players that are making the digital projectors now?
There's some of the same. I mean, certainly some companies that started up. One of the main manufacturers is Christie, which is based in Canada. I don't think they ever made film projectors, and they're one of the leading. I mean, we in the Michigan Theater and the State Theater in Ann Arbor, we have all Christie projectors. But there's a company called Strong that still exists. That we had Strong lamp houses for our film projectors that were definitely built decades ago, and Strong still exists, marketing and selling equipment. But I think a lot of the projection now, the digital projection, is made by different companies that started out in digital stuff, and they weren't making film projectors before that.
I seem to remember like a German company being famous for making some of the old big projectors, but I can't remember what it was anymore.
Right. I mean, there were Bauer, there was Kinetone in Germany. That we have 35 millimeter Kinetone projectors. They were kind of state of the art for 35 millimeter 25 years ago. But there were companies like Simplex and Century and Brinkert and a few others making 35 millimeter projectors. I don't think those companies exist anymore unless they change their name and were morphed into something with a different name that I don't know about.
Yeah, it's just a footnote thing. But where do you see, you've been in the business quite a while, and you've been in the projection booth, and as you define now, the new digital things, you're playing a modified role, you're setting things up, and you step back and go off and do other things, and there's someone in the theater that starts the film, you set up how it's going to do and the timing and all that. What do you think the next step is in the evolution of this coming up? Do you have any feel for that?
I don't know. I mean, things have changed a lot in the last few years. The way movie theaters exist is very rapidly changing right now. I mean, people have their home big, giant, flat-screen TVs, and they can watch anything on demand and streaming, and people are spending, $20, $30, $40 a month on streaming services. And, to go out and spend $10 or $15 to go watch a movie, just one movie, and buy popcorn for God knows 10 more bucks and a Coke, the economics are looking pretty bad for the, bricks and mortar movie theaters. And, the people still rush out to see the new release, the new big screen, $400 million special effects movies, because you do get an incredible experience in a theater, and it's a joyful experience to see it with other people. I mean, to have the laughter and the oohs and the ahs, that is something that has always been a part of the theater-going experience for live theater and movies that you just don't get at home. And it's kind of sad because I think a lot of movies, older movies that were designed to be seen with an audience, don't play as well when you're watching them just with one or two people at home. And newer, like streaming series and stuff, are designed more for that intimate audience. So it's a different aesthetic. And it is important to still have that opportunity to see something in a theater with other human beings, strangers in the dark, But I don't know, it just feels like, just looking at little anecdotal things, the big new blockbuster movies still do well, but the art house movies that used to have a steady core audience have dropped off. Sometimes they'll do okay, but other ones will just be a complete flat bust. And, because people will say, oh, well, I'll wait till it comes on Netflix, And so it's really hard to know. Will there be movie theaters outside of special interest kind of areas in 10 or 20 years? Already here in Ann Arbor, we had several multiplexes, and one of them closed during COVID or just after, and it's gone for good. And, it's hard to know.
There was one out in Briarwood, a mall near Ann Arbor for a while, and I forgot when that went over, but I remember I saw Midnight Express or some movie out there back when I was a student. And the last time I went out, there's no movie theater there anymore at all.
Right. That died off. For a while it was a hot spot, but then it kind of shifted to like second run movies that were like $1, and then it just was gone.
Yeah. Have you, in your interaction with whether it's other projectionists or film faculty, or in the midst of a elite university, and they've had a history of AV, film technology, and TV and filmmaking and so on there. And there's different personalities been involved. But do you have any feedback or interaction, impressions from people, how the new technologies are impacting their livelihood, or how they define their job with AI coming in, or not necessarily even AI, but digitization and the way things are being reorganized?
It's hard to tell from my perspective. I think it's a little too early to tell. I mean, there's certainly, possibilities for special effects and things that might have cost an insane amount of money, and now they're going to be much easier to do. But, I feel like I'm not qualified to really hazard a guess on how AI at this point in time is going to affect the movie industry.
Does it seem like film professors and that are still teaching their classes more or less the same way they were 10 years ago, in terms
Pretty
of what
much.
they're actually, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the side of the thing I don't really see is the production side. Our unit assists classes that are more on the film theory and film history side, where they're screening movies and they're discussing, the movie that was screened, and they're showing clips in class. The people that are actually shooting films, we don't really support that. There's a whole separate unit that supports those people, so I don't know what they would talk about in class as far as how AI is going to impact things. I mean, I know there's still a very robust screenwriting program. I mean, and I know that the movie industry has had, there was a strike a couple of years ago with the screenwriters and actors, coming out and saying we don't want AI taking our jobs, and negotiating contracts that protected their jobs. So, there's always the threat that someone's going to say, write a screenplay with these characters and this plot line and spit it out, and 10 minutes later there's a half-hour show that, yeah, it's sort of okay, and you can tweak it and make it sort of looks like you wrote it, I mean, that's certainly a fear that everyone has. But, I think it's still too early to tell whether the market will accept stuff like that. I mean, clearly, if you look at the world of music, I mean, there's insane amounts of uploaded AI-generated music that goes on to Spotify and all these web services, and because, someone can not have to pay royalties, so you can have like a yoga workout with AI-generated music, and there's even been fake rock bands, and what were these people called, Velvet Sundown or something, that had a whole album, and then they had like 5 albums within like a week, and there were pictures of them that looked like real guys, and it sounded sort of like CCR meets Bruce Springsteen or something, and it had like 1 million clicks in a week, and then it was revealed that, oh wait, it's totally fake, So yeah, I don't know. I mean, if someone can create a movie, a 2-hour movie that's completely no real actors are involved, no real screenwriters involved, that's a lot more complicated than a 3-minute song, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Well, it's been very interesting delving into especially the things I wanted to know about, and I think it gives our viewers, our listeners, a better idea of what's preceding some of the changes to come, where it's coming from, so we're all better equipped to understand it and to deal with it, because we know what it's coming out of and some of that rich history. And though I wonder, in terms of what we've talked about today, Frank, like, is there anything else you want to say? Some things I went too fast, ran too fast, so you want to detail a little bit more, or is there anything you'd like to share with people, whether it's related to your book or the topics we've talked about, that I may have steered us out of the most important part of projection or something that we should talk about?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I mean, I'm more of an analog kind of guy, so I like the era when you couldn't stream something, you had to go out and see a real movie with real people, and it's convenient and it's easy to just dial something up on Netflix or pop in a DVD, and you can do it at your own pace in your own home. You can pause it and go to the refrigerator and come back. But I don't know, it's like a balloon, you let a lot of the air out by doing that, and it's not as exciting to be actually, oh my gosh, we've got to go meet, with people at 7 p.m. the movie's starting, and you might have been waiting 6 months for that movie to play. I mean, in the 70s and 80s and before, these movies were not screened every day, so the campus film societies would delve into the catalogs and get the deep cuts, and show an Ernst Lubitsch festival and show these very rare films that you couldn't see any other way. And, only a handful of people might show up to some of them, but it was, it was an opportunity that was so rare that there was something special about it. And it's nice to have all the convenience of everything today, but your pace isn't getting quickened. You're not getting the vibe of like, I just saw something really special. You can just stop and say, once you got it in the car and drove in and parked and went to the theater and sat and watched it, you subjected yourself to something that maybe now you would dismiss more casually. But in the end, you might have thought, wow, I'm glad I sat through that whole movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, a sentiment that I share completely. Well, Frank Uhle, thanks so much for joining us here in Pico's World today. And I'm going to leave the link to your book, Cinema Ann Arbor, How Campus Rebels Forged a Singular Film Culture. That was published in 2003, but it's still very, very current, very relevant. For those of you on the V podcast, can you hold it up again there, Frank? Zoom in on that. And I'm going to put a link to it down below on Amazon and maybe a couple reviews as well. Thank you for that. Frank, it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience being able to chat with you about this. And I hope we can come together again in a couple years and look at it from another point of view, how have things changed and how our perspectives have changed on it. It's just been really great.
Yeah, I have no idea what will happen. What it'll be like in 2 years, obviously.
Thanks so much, Frank Uhle, and good luck with everything, and we'll see you again.
All right, Al, thank you so much. Pleasure to be on.